Most people don't think of strategy that way.
Developing a new strategy.
Strategic blind spots.
When strategy meets reality.
Strategy and innovation.
In the strategy world.
Drive their strategic goals.
And welcome back to Strategy Meets Reality podcast. Welcome back to Strategy Meets Reality podcast. It's great to have you again. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Dr. Alice Jing Shan, joining all the way from Edinburgh. And I'm delighted to have Alice on. I hunted you down and I tried to get you, convince you to come on, and finally you've agreed and you've come on. So that's absolutely fantastic. So welcome. Thank you for joining us, Alice.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Happy to be here.
Perfect. So for the listeners that haven't had the privilege of seeing your work online on Substack, which I'll link, and LinkedIn, which I'll link in the show notes, please could you give a bit of background about yourself and a bit of context about what you've been up to lately?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Alice. I publish in English as Dr. Alice Jing Shan, and my Chinese name is Shan Jing. I am a person who observes and writes about how human systems hold together, come apart, and evolve under pressure. So this is the question I keep returning to in my work, my writing, and my life. And my own work moves across areas such as language, education, culture, organizations, and increasingly these days, artificial intelligence. They may seem like separate fields, but I see them as interrelated sites where the same underlying dynamics keep appearing. And I trace these reoccurring patterns through relational dynamics, which is my original lens for understanding system trajectories. In the age of AI, or what I call the age of AIR, I believe the questions I've been working on and returning to for many years is becoming increasingly urgent and relevant for all of us. And thank you very much, Mike, for having me here today.
Oh, no, it's a pleasure. And that's what I'd like to dig in. There's a lot I want to discuss, from strategies to tactics to AI. But first, as you mentioned it, do you mind giving just a bit of context about relational dynamics?
So relational dynamics is something I've been working on for a while, but perhaps consolidated finally in the past year or so. So it's an umbrella term, umbrella frame that I work within, which I proposed ontology called Ontology of Relational Dynamics, with a core claim that reality is relational dynamics under constraint over time. And because it's a solid, I think, an ontology which answers the question, what is reality? And that naturally is upstream and downstream. It can guide a lot of different ways of understanding how knowledge is generated and how we apply different methods to understand different domains. So an easy way of understanding it is relational dynamics is my kernel, is my operating system, and everything else is application.
I like it. You got a really key thing in there about relational. Now, I've just had this, so I'm just fresh off a call with a client this morning, and they've done a great PowerPoint. You know, with listeners will know my contempt for PowerPoints, but this was lovely. But what they've done is they had a lot of information there about the market, about these competitors are doing this, we're doing this, but there was nothing that was relational. So they were talking about their opportunities, but none of it was relational to, but in comparative to what and to who. So they had all these competitors all around saying that they're doing this, but what's the relation? Where is it going? And I thought that when you think about relational dynamics, thinking about actually what's the interfaces, what's the connections, where is that going on a sort of default trajectory, or how could that be not interfered with, but how can we shape that trajectory?
This is very interesting and very common. You see organizations talking about certain market and they look at other opponents, what other people are doing, and there's really multifold here. First of all, I think the relation is not just relation to other people in the field is a relation to the field itself.
Yeah.
And in society, in human systems, very often we forget that the field is changing itself very much and in nested fields. So a market is never just a static market. The market can change and your whole industry can just disappear very quickly, especially these days with artificial intelligence. So the fact that if your eyes are only on what other people similar to your company are doing, I think essentially they're already losing contact with reality. And we should talk more about, strategy meets reality, because I really like the title. It rejects the idea that reality is static. Reality is changing all the time. And one thing about strategy in my working frame is that strategy is field level awareness. So you're in coherence, you're reading the field, whereas tactic is more like executive motion. So you look at who is doing what when. So this is more tactical. Of course, you need to look at what other opponents are doing. But if you lose sight of, for instance, your own goal, what is the relationship between the people in your own company that can bring to the table and your relationship to the field, then perhaps you're already limiting yourself. And important, I think one thing we can also see, we talk a little bit about sports. And I really like to use sports as or metaphor when we talk about strategy, because a lot of people, they don't have to be theorists to understand that strategies apply in sports, and we all have like a physical interaction. Doesn't matter if we are the players or the audience, we have this physical understanding, embodied understanding of how strategies are applied in the field. So if you're only looking at what your opponents are doing, then essentially you're forgetting your own team, and and one strategy doesn't work for obviously every team. And you need to work with the weather, you need to work with the media, you need to work with so many other elements. And that is the beauty of, I suppose, human systems, because it's so complex. But that's also what makes it so difficult.
Yeah. And I remember like when we met up for a pre-chat before the show, and I was talking about, everyone uses strategy now. It's just a term. It's just thrown around in organizations. And you said, from your sort of heritage and your background, that strategy is quite a serious word. And it's not one that's just thrown around as easy as it probably is in a lot of sort of Western organizations.
Yeah, so strategies, where I come from, first of all, it's something that feels quite big and grand. And I suppose a lot of people also perhaps make the mistake, in my opinion, of the distinction between these two terms. Some people think it's long-term versus short-term.
Yeah.
And or think strategy is somehow more elaborate. But I think it doesn't really work like that. So I think, from a relational dynamics perspective, strategy is not only about choosing a goal or destination. It is a way of staying coherently with a moving field and moving reality. So I'll give you an example. So strategy is something that needs to be tested by constraints, timing, emotions, power dynamics, organizational memories, incentive structures, human emotions, our language and communication capacity limits. These are the things that are at the field level. And tactics are the exact move. So who does what when? So these are very different levels. It's not just that strategies are better than tactics. For something to work, you need both strategy and tactics. But if we don't get the distinction right, I think a warning or the danger is that you can see people very busy. You can see organizations are trying to be really, really productive by doing a lot of things. Doesn't matter if it's organization or individuals. We're just busy, but we're not actually making any strategic advance. We're just running in circles. And that can be very dangerous because, as I said, these days, things are moving so quickly and we need to keep an eye on the field.
Yes. And I think that's important connection that is often missing in that strategic thinking, is that we come up with an idea, we then set our functions to do stuff, and then we then try to optimize the parts. So we get that function, you just be really good at this, but what we're not looking at is that what is the strategic effect that the whole is having on the external environment, and then with that, then how's that changing our understanding, as you put it, the field. So now we've done that, how has the field responded to our intervention, and then also what's changing in the field from our last assumptions. There doesn't seem to be that full look to go, well, we've done this, what's happened, or this is happening now, is what we're doing still relevant?
Yeah, and in Chinese, actually, we have an idiom called 纸上谈兵, which literally means discussing warfare on a piece of paper. It describes the kind of wishful thinking strategy that sounds clever in abstraction or nice in documentation, but fails the moment it touches reality.
Oh, I love that. I'm gonna have to learn that.
I'll send you the link to some. Yeah, I'll send you the phrase. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'll the only one I'll learn. I'm not great with languages, but yeah, and I exactly right. And I think there's this whole point with reality that gets missed. I think this is why I created, When Strategy Meets Reality podcast, in the fact that it's only really until you start to engage with that reality will you know how things respond. And really, we must always realize as well is that our perspective of reality is always going to be limited, and there's always going to be darkness that we don't know. Yeah, and we have to keep interacting, but it doesn't mean. And I wrote about this not long ago, saying that basically there's always a gap. It's the gap in strategy; it never closes, because there's always our assumption, there's always how it meets reality, and there's always going to be a gap between those two that we're constantly managing. It doesn't mean it fails.
Yeah. That's a very good point, and you're absolutely right. There's always a gap, and that's why I think eventually it pushes me to the point where I was trying to think, what is reality?
Yeah.
I think most people just don't think about it, which is fine. Everybody needs a hobby. That was my hobby. And the reason why I think relational dynamics under constraint over time is powerful, because I basically compressed it to two variables. So you've got relational dynamics and you have constraint, and over time, those are two dimensions. So I'm trying to include as many things as possible, but not flattening the nuances. And like we talked about, a lot of people don't think about relations. They think things are just things. But very often, especially in complex systems and in human systems, we're not just things. We exist because there is some sort of relation that brings us together, and that needs to come first, I think. And then the dynamics. And I mean, obviously we can see as we grow older, we're interacting with different people, different organizations, bigger and bigger, our connections. So it's easy to see the dynamics. It's easy to see the changes of an organization, of a country, of an individual. But I think it's important to not lose sight of what makes us meaningful in the first place, which is the relation.
Yes. Yeah. I have to revert back to the idea of structural coupling from Umberto Maciano. Is really important. Changing in us, change the environment, change the environment, change us. We are related. We are coupled.
Yes.
And it's really important to realize. But you also mentioned really two critical things in strategy I think are overlooked. One is constraint, and the other is time. Especially time over constraints. I think people are starting to think about constraints, probably not in the same way that we think about it, but time is definitely something that is never looked. I've never looked at a strategy document and the only mention of time is like 2031 or something, 5-10 years into that's the only time that they mention time. There's no mention of time around tempo and speed, that we need to do things. Our window of opportunity is open for this So we need to think about our internal tempo. Can we meet that? But I think time is something that is seriously overlooked.
Yes, it is. So in my own framework, time is one of the 4 key criterias. So I think in English, you have a saying called the right time, right place, and right people.
Yeah.
Chinese, we have a saying, 天时地利人和. It's very similar. So you can see that timing is always part of the strategy, part of what makes something excellent. But timing, in my working frame, I think it's also about threshold. So it's about when you gauge accumulated conditions, do they meet a threshold? For instance, let's see a football pitch. Okay, I'm not like very, very big on football in terms of vocabulary, but I do like to talk about football and watch them. You can have an excellent player who is a great sprinter, right? But he can't just be running around the whole time. You know, he needs to preserve his energy when the time is right. It's a very straightforward idea that you can't just have somebody who is great at doing something, keep doing something the whole time. Timing is very, very important. So it's the same with organization. You can strike or you can launch only when the timing is right. But the timing is tricky because many people might use calendar time. So the more flattened calendar time or physical time. Whereas I think more realistically, we should be looking at calendar time as well as what I call developmental time. So developmental time is looking at the conditions, really. Are we ready to do something?
Yes.
Instead of thinking, oh, there's a rule book according to this company that succeeded last year. They said by the 4th month, you should be able to do something. That is fundamentally not a very good strategy because the timing, the threshold has not met. So it's very important, I think, to think about timing in terms of the threshold. And also, just because your company is ready, your organization is ready, doesn't mean the market is ready, doesn't mean the interface is ready. So, for instance, you can have a brilliant, theory or your brilliant product ready, but if there's no interface, like I said, no interface, no entry. So you gotta somehow work on the interface. If there isn't one, then you need to build the interface so that somebody or something can have that capacity to hold. So it's all very coherent. They all need to move at the same time. Yeah.
Yes. It's really important. And that's a classic with Netflix. They had the idea, they moved, but the environment or the interface wasn't ready. So they had to hold back and then they relaunched when it was ready. So it's a really classic case around the timing point. But what you put is interfaces are quite interesting. So, would you be able to explore more about sort of interfaces?
So interface here is not like a technical term, even though it can get very technical and operationalized and very much computerized these days. But interface essentially, in my working frame, is when something is made available to another. So it's not just a medium, it's not static. Interface is where something is made available to another, but interface can also change, can also play a role. So for instance, a more like, let's say a static interface would be, here's an example. In our previous house, we wanted to build a glass house. So a glass house in our garden. And I had never had any construction experience in my life. So I thought you just build a glass house. We had the money, we had the land, we had the manpower. And obviously you need something called decking.
Yes, yeah.
I didn't know that. And it turns out that the amount of time and energy and working with the weather to build the decking took us forever because we didn't have an interface to hold the new structure we would like to build to attach to our house. And also after we built it, so after we did the decking and we had the glass house, that took, building glass house was so quickly. It was very quick. It just come out of nowhere with the proper help, but the decking took forever and we never once got compliment on the decking. It was always the glass house. And that was interesting because so many people don't look at the foundation where they make something possible. They look at the final product. And I think that's also a strategic, probably a blind spot, thinking that just because you've got the resources, you've got the things ready, but you maybe lose sight in the field that something is missing. And in a more human system term, I would say that our eyes, our ears, these are all interfaces because they are the places where light is made available to our brain. They're, how sound's made available to our brain. So these are all interfaces. And also for human interaction, language is very much interface. We wouldn't be able to communicate our thoughts without the medium of language. But also language is tricky here because language itself plays a role. So it's not transparent. You see, it's not. During this conversation, there are times that we misunderstand each other. We have to negotiate. We have to explain ourselves. So it's constantly, there's tension and friction. That's what makes it so interesting because language is so dynamic. It's one of the most overlooked but stable interface in human society.
Yes.
But with now artificial intelligence, especially large language models, one of my proposals is that we look at language, we rethink language as interface because it has entered, because the computers now have entered human systems. So the language itself have become hybrid. It's both computer language and human system language. So we should not look at these models as just computers or machines. They have taken on human communication interfaces, which makes a huge difference in terms of our interaction and understanding of them.
Yeah. And I think that takes a completely different approach than what we're used to.
Yeah.
Because, I'm English, so I have the privilege of going to most countries and not needing to worry about different languages because most people will try and normally if, and it's the same in organizations, but if I go somewhere and they don't understand me, my response then is thinking, I just need to be clearer and louder. And you go clearer and louder. So I just repeat what I've just said, but clearer and louder. And I think that's how traditionally we've tried to bridge that interface with language, is that if people don't understand us, obviously the answer is just more clarity. So we just repeat the same things, but just try and be clearer or simpler. But I think what you're talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, is there's more of an understanding and interpretation that needs to happen, which I don't think that we really spend time thinking about. We just think, well, if they've not understood me, I just need to do it more. I need to amplify more. And you hear a lot of in organizations that you should just communicate some more, and eventually people will understand. But I definitely believe in more and more that is not true.
Yeah, I think you're really onto something. And for people who've worked with organizations, I think we all intuitively know that communication is not just saying more or having more meetings. There's something more nuanced in it. And in my PhD, I proposed a framework called oral participation, an iceberg model of oral participation, where I broke down the communication to different parts. So we talked about in our previous meeting, we talked about, even though I think in complex systems, there are so many interrelated parts, there are still parts that we can take them apart and see what is leading to what. So that is the structured sequence and structured coupling we're talking about. And I think we shouldn't give up just because it's so complicated. We should track the dynamics. So in that in that iceberg of oral participation model, I proposed different elements in communication in terms of what I call the knowing. So that's the cognitive capacity, the feeling. So that's the psychological readiness, and there's the doing. So do you have the linguistic vocabulary to say it? And there's also, of course, the social contextual relationship. So do I feel confident, comfortable to speak out next to you? And also there's the external surroundings. For example, are we having this communication in a classroom, in a meeting, or in a pub? It all changes the relationship of that particular communication. So if an employee is not being honest with you or is not being comfortable speaking up, maybe the best approach is not to try to have more serious meetings with them one-on-one. Maybe it's not helpful, and maybe try change the location and try to think about maybe there's much more nuance in that relationship. And the power dynamics is always an interesting one because, for instance, you talked about yourself being a native English speaker, and I also spend a lot of time researching the dynamics between native English speakers and non-native English speakers. It's very interesting because I think it was my supervisor, actually, Nicola Galloway, who proposed the term shared non-nativeness. It refers to the solidarity or the common understanding of people who are non-native English speakers, and we tend to be perhaps more tolerant to each other's verbal issues in verbal communication. We tend to use more strategies, more creative in terms of the way we play with words, whereas there is this implicit power dynamics between the speech between a native speaker and a non-native speaker. It's not that people coming with a force of authority. It's something that you may be telling yourself that I'm not speaking here as a native speaker. I feel a little bit inferior, even though you could be a domain expert. So that is very, very important to remember, especially now we're all involved in this frequent intercultural communication. And I think, it's something to be aware, self-aware. Yeah, when we have this kind of
I remember having, so when I was at Sandhurst, I was instructor at Sandhurst, and in my platoon of officer cadets, I had mainly English, obviously, because they were the British Academy, but we had foreign cadets. So I had a Qatari, I had a Bahrainian, and I had a German national. And I remember having to stop my platoon one day and just get them to imagine you were in this foreign academy, and everyone was speaking a foreign language.
Yeah.
How would you feel? What would you want from people, your fellow cadets around you, to consider when you're doing that? Because they almost came blind to the fact that they were, even though they knew they were the foreign cadets, but I think it was blind about the sort of that power dynamics in the language and the ease of our language, but not the ease of our language, but obviously to each other. But it's also the colloquialism of our language, is that we have several things that sound the same, that mean different things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that was a good pause for them to rethink about, how they approach that and that power dynamics in the language. But how do you think this is changing or adapting with AI?
Oh, this is so interesting. So, because now we are on to self-aware that just because you're very fluent in a language doesn't necessarily mean you're more competent, I suppose, because you could be a native speaker in this language without actually more reference to a bigger world, so to speak. And in that sense, I think from very early age or early in my work, I've noticed that fluency does not necessarily mean registration, or fluency does not necessarily mean you're very good. It just means that somebody can talk. And AI has really accelerated to an extreme, because before we can't compute, we can't process information that quickly, and therefore you still need some time to generate meaning, and we have more clues to interpret somebody, like their text and stuff. But now with AI, and I'm not even talking about the most advanced model, I'm just talking about, like, let's say ChatGPT, it can produce such large amount of text so quickly, so fluently, but also talking nonsense. It really takes the fluency does not necessarily mean registration to the next level. Some people call it hallucination. I think a hallucination is not created by artificial intelligence. Humans do that all the time. But it takes it to the next level where you can see that just because it's largely produced, it's produced really, really quickly, sometimes it doesn't really mean very much. And that also, I think we can see a lot, for example, on LinkedIn, a lot of people producing large quantity of things that are not very deep, not very useful, not very fruitful. And I actually have a very interesting observation lately. We're talking about non-nativeness, feeling a bit inferior, feeling a little bit insecure, for example, with your sentence structure, with the spelling and stuff. I've noticed that some people are saying, I'm trying to make typos just to show that I'm an authentic human, or I'm trying to write not so perfect because I want to preserve that authenticity of being human. And I think this is so interesting. It's the opposite of what I was being taught, because our model was trying to sound like native speakers, trying to write like native speakers, trying to be correct, trying to behave like large language models, basically.
Yeah.
Now you've got people do the reverse. It's almost like saying you go to McDonald's and you're so tired of everything tastes the same. You want something that is specially made for you from a home kitchen kind of.
Yeah. But it's true. No, I find this in my right. And I said to you before, I've not engaged because a lot of that, but I've heard people put up stuff like going up. You can tell if it's AI written and it's used words like coherence and stuff. I was like, coherence is like a standard word for us. Definitely what we talk about. Coherence is really important word. You can't use alignment. It's not the same thing. And it's just like there was all these different words, and I'm like, wow, I use those words.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, Jesus, what's going on? And I think you can tell quite easily when people are, but it's a very difficult thing to navigate at the moment. And there was something that you said that was really important in that before I got sidetracked with the words. And it was the confidence. You talk about the fluency, but it's also the confidence that happens. So I was with some clients and we were running a bit of experimentation, and it was quite interesting because they had their analysts. So their analysts went off and they were looking at the external environment, looking for things that we wanted to prod and understand a bit more about. And we've done the same with AI. Except for the problem is when we were getting a large text back from the AI, it was very confident. So you can't tell, but when the analyst done it, and the analyst's work was just as good, probably not as large volume, but really good and clear. But the difference is that when the analyst spoke back about the findings, you can tell by the way they communicated where the confidence was in certain areas. So we could get that back where with AI, I found it was quite flat in the sense that you can't tell. There's no, the confidence is there that everything is okay. And I think that's more worrying.
When you said the analysts, were they talking back as in verbal form or they typing?
It was both. So we had verbal and we had the presentation. So we could tell not only, I suppose, that's a really good question actually, because a lot of it I was listening to verbal. So I could tell a lot but even in their report back, you can tell where some bits are a bit lacking, some a bit more, and you can then prod and go, well, what's happening here? Where when we got the stuff back from AI, it was very good. But I was just like, whoa, I don't know where to start with this.
Yeah, it's just very interesting. So I've been observing that as well. For human, that's what I meant by the language interface is one of the most stable and most long-lasting, enduring human interface because it's part of the interfaces embedded in many, many interfaces of human bodies. We use our senses, our different senses, at least 5 senses, if not 6 or more. And together, we have this coherent understanding of the person who's in front of us, which I call social modeling. For instance, I am speaking confidently and comfortably with you, but I pause, and that's where the attention goes, the energy goes, and you can see, oh, I'm thinking about it. Maybe there's something more here, or maybe because I am uncertain. So it's more natural. It's just how people used to talk, as how the language is supposed to talk, is supposed to be used. And let's put it maybe not the most statistical correct way, but maybe we put 5% or less in the actual words we use, but the overall senses of how the words come out. Let's say if I am talking to you, but my body language is like really, really shrinking, and I look uncomfortable, unconfident, and then you know that something's not right here, even though I could be using the exact same words. I might worry with this over obsession without fully understanding that how language works, is we flatten the multi-dimension of communication to just the text form. And you can easily see how an email is interpreted by 10 different employees in 10 different ways because they don't see the person behind it. And when documents or meeting summaries are produced at large volume, high speed, a lot of this real communication nuances or the original intention can be all flattened, and that can have a lot of consequences. Yeah.
I think that's the point we try and get at, especially with strategy, when we're trying to communicate that clear intent so that people have the framework to be able to deploy the tactics, to be able to do what they need to do.
Really important here. So if we focus only very much on the language side, you quickly find out that language in these models, without the understanding of the field, can easily drift. So not all drifts are bad, because sometimes drift can also lead to creativity. But my point is, we need to make sure the drifts are transparent. We need to know that when something is drifting from its original intent. I actually have a visual aid here with my children's toys.
Oh, love that.
So if, let's say, you have an idea that is like this, and because I'm giving a speech, I am going to make it a bigger idea because it sounds better. And during the meeting or during the briefing, I forgot part of the idea, because this is how real communication works, right? I forgot part of idea, so only this much came out. But we've still got 10 more minutes, so I think I'm going to add a bit more. But because it didn't come out so fluently, it's like this bit. Okay, so it starts to change. And then the audience or my employee, they heard this bit. So they think, oh, I remember it's this shape. So when they go home, maybe it look like this. And it just start to like change. And maybe you have other employees or other people who's listening, and it's like a different language, right? So you just keep changing it. And my whole point is that you see, like, the original idea can easily drift. And of course, when you move to a different language, and things get even more crazy because you don't find the exact word. So things start to curve. They start to curve, and they start to shape into things that you didn't expect to happen. And then there's also all of these, let's say, the framework, the organizational framework. We have a model, but it has to fit with our framework. So you have all these things around it. And very, very soon, if you don't pay enough attention, a simple idea can drift into something that's completely different. Not to say this is not cute, but not to say this is not useful, but obviously very different from the original intent. And I think that's what we need to really pay attention to, these tools, or what I call not just tools, they're actually complex adaptive systems. Because as we're sleeping, as we're doing our thing, AI is constantly changing, and we need to be very mindful of that. I'm not against AI. I just think we need to understand these are not tools. These are changing systems, changing complex systems. So I would rather think of them as condition rather than tools.
Yes, I agree. And sometimes people think I'm anti-AI. I'm not. It's just that there's a lot to consider, like what you've eloquently put, and the fact that I always say about the recursive levels and different
Yes.
horizons and stuff. So you need to be really careful when you bring that into businesses. But what you've highlighted there about I love that, by the way. Yeah, I love that's perfect. What you're demonstrating with those shapes changing is the same if we go back to where we started our original conversation at the start about the external environment and how we're coupled with it. Is that your intent, your idea is not being delivered by you as the strategic leader, is being delivered by the parts of the organization.
Yes.
And we need to ensure that intent is really clearly understood, because their actions are going to determine if we're going to have that effect on the external environment that we so wish to have.
Yeah.
And it's often people don't look, as I was saying before, they don't look back to go, actually, is from the idea, from our hypothesis, our assumption that we had, to our intent, to the actions that people have done through the tactics, is the culmination of those tactics
Yes.
now influencing the external environment in the way that we wanted to. And you imagine, just in your demonstration there, that whole chain of events, there's so many variables in there. And that's why it's so important that we're very clear about what is our intent, what is the effect that we're hoping to see, and what's happening, so we can then see where things are going well or not so well.
Yeah, I'm laughing right here because I'm just thinking about World Cup as we speak. And in football or in basketball, very often you see this in the field where you have 5 players on a team or 11, doesn't matter. You have a clear strategy. Everybody seems to understand the strategy. But in complex systems, we have a saying, the collective is not just things adding up. It's the more than the addition. It's the structured coupling. So how you position the players really matters, right? It doesn't matter. You tell them it's a strategy, but you have to have the tactics, who's standing what, passing the ball to who. And in that sense, sometimes we also have, in that case, we also have a foreign coach who doesn't speak the same language as the player.
Yeah.
And see, like how many layers can the strategies or the tactics lost in translation? Because it's not just a coach's idea. The ideas can be changed so many times, and maybe the team members are talking about their tactics, their strategies as they go. So I think that's why sports is so much fun, because you see so many small incidences where people's interpretation, their emotion, and audiences, spectators' reactions, everything come into play. It's what I meant by strategy is the field level, because you need to understand everything is changing, and you can't not have the same strategy playing this team versus that team. Every team is different, so your strategy needs to change in relation to who you're playing against, right? So I think this is a great example of combining the language element as well as the strategic, tactical element and World Cup as we speak.
Yes, yeah. It's really fascinating when you go that, but I always see you. I like the word you use, flattening. We try to flatten everything down into the most simplest form, and you see this a lot with what's your winning aspiration, and then that sort of it, and what's your sort of priorities. I think they miss a lot of the dynamics, the relations that happen or need to happen.
That's also the danger of only looking at the successful stories, I think, because the successful stories, it's very often just a slice of reality, slice of truth, or maybe the end game, the tail of that trajectory. Whereas if you look at a lot of failures, I like to look at failure modes because they fail in so many different ways, but you can learn so much. And that is also the danger of adopting, let's say, a framework, a model, because you expect reality to work that way. But very often, I like to say models are at best a representation of a version of reality. And a model was only proposed under certain constraints, certain conditions, and very easily they just don't work. So if you go in thinking that this is our model, this is our plan, it needs to work, and then you come up with more models, more what I call consumptive virtue to stick to that original plan, very soon you might find yourself in not a very comfortable position. Yeah.
No. And look at that. And I was speaking to someone a few weeks back, and I said, so when do you know that you need to relook at your strategy? And their answer was next year when we have our strategy refresh. And I was just like, wow, okay, that's not really what I was expecting. But that is just, I'll say it's not an extreme, because I know some that probably won't look for 5 years, but that's the problem. They put so much energy in this view. You see it, they put a lot of energy in this view of trying to get market analysis now and do that. And they put a lot of energy in it to then basically come up with an idea and they leave it. They don't have any of those sort of feedback loops to go, well, how do we know, what's changing the external environment? What is constraints may appear that will mean that actually what we were going to do is not viable. So how do we then know that, what do we know about the tempo and the speed in which we need to be able to get ourselves ready to execute for the right time, the right interfaces? If we miss that opportunity, what does that mean? I think there's not really that ongoing orientation that needs to happen, that constant view of the internal, external, what's happening, what's the relationship, and how do we continuously move to our advantage?
Yeah, and on that point, there's also written about it in complex human systems. Nothing stays local, really. Nothing stays local. Everything has some sort of reaction. One leads to another. So nothing stays local. There's always a global effect. Maybe in loosely coupled system, you don't see it so obvious, but in tightly coupled systems, you see very quickly one thing leads to another. And in Chinese, we have a beautiful, a little bit dramatic saying, but very beautiful saying called 牵一发而动全身, which literally means pull one hair and your whole body moves.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, it's like one thing, it's a tiny, tiny localized movement, but your whole body moves, which is a very, interesting way of describing the dynamics in complex systems.
Yeah. And I see this in, we use sports as an analogy. So I use Formula One, as I've got Max Verstappen behind me, looking at me, is that you see that. And this is why I like Formula One so much, because you see the strategy. And this is the thing earlier you were saying about is not necessarily long term, because their strategy is normally very short term.
Yeah.
And it's track by track relational to the track. But when you're saying about pull one hair and then everything happens, you only saw it this week that there was one thing where Lewis Hamilton went into the pit early and everyone else had to react to that. So everyone's strategy that they thought they were doing, or the tactics they thought they were doing, suddenly had to change because something that they didn't think was going to happen actually happened. And just that one action causes a reaction around, which then means that they've reacted to that. Now the trajectory they were going has changed.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's quite interesting when you look at that.
And when you have a good team, for instance, if you have a good team, a healthy organization that is developing the pace they're developing, and they have the structure to hold that pace, and then you naturally see if something happens, the whole organization has this coherence to move together. But very often we see, for example, an organization expanding or having a successful line. So they go. They have this momentum, but actually the structure is not ready for that to keep up. And that's when a lot of things can go wrong. And they don't understand why we were successful in launching that product, but not the whole line or whole 10 products or in 10 areas. I think often it leads back to because the capacity, the structure, the holding capacity or the coherence is not there yet for them to move together. It's almost like in the field where one talented footballer is already in possession of the ball and he just go, but the whole team is already still behind. They need to work together coherently to move forward, which is also why it explains why in our organizations, including football and basketball teams, we really like talents. We like elite superstars. But very often when they go to play, they somehow suck. They somehow don't really shine. And when we don't understand why, I think partly it's because organizations hire them and then don't have the holding capacity, don't have the team that can create the condition for the superstars to work. And obviously in World Cup, you see people who are playing the leagues and they're superstars. But when they come to train with their own national teams, they haven't got a good understanding of the strategies or have enough time for the tactical, systems to work coherently, and therefore they don't win or they don't perform as well as we would expected them to work. And we see that a lot across domains. Doesn't matter it's in governance or in management, in education, in business, economics, or football. It's across the board. We want talents, but we don't have the structure to create the conditions to let the talents shine. And another thing about this trap is that because talents are so good, they're so used to performing so well, so they take on additional stress on themselves, or they feel like, why can't they beat themselves up for not performing well? And that has a whole lot of consequences on their well-being and other relations. They may be resentful to other players, other team members. So it's a lot of consequences of not understanding the dynamics.
Yes. You saw that in England rugby with Marcus Smith. In Harlequins, he had the structure around him to have that flair and that speed and that capacity to adapt quickly. When he went to England, it was almost all that was not there. It was quite slow and mechanistic, and everything had to be planned. And that's not where he shined in. And you could tell that, especially that last part about him beating himself up about his performance, you could really see that. And it's sort of the compound effect of that made more errors. And you see this with a lot of organizations. I know we're coming to time, but you see it where they optimize for those parts. Optimize, but they're not really thinking about the coherent nature about, well, how do we get the effect from the whole? So how do we make the whole in service for the effect, rather than let's just optimize and hope then that the effect will come by the optimized parts?
Yeah, local optimization just doesn't work in the long run.
No. I love that. Thank you for coming on, Alice. Before you go though, what would you like to leave our listeners to think about from this episode?
What would I like? I think so. Part of the interview we haven't fully, I think, explored is AI. And the question I would love our audience to think about is that in the age of AI, are we still in relationship with reality, or are we just getting better at responding to the representation of reality? That was, I think that would be a question I would encourage everybody to think, because we're so used to using different software, different tools or different AI products. Are we losing contact with the field? That would be my question.
Wow. There's a lot there to think about. I'm already thinking, I'm already buzzing away thinking around, our own bias that we put into what we're asking, and plus it's eagerness and confidence to give us a response. Actually, I think we're spending a lot of time optimizing and not going actually testing those assumptions.
Yeah, and if you think about the representation, because all the products that we're interacting, what we call AI, they're essentially based on certain models. And models, like we talked about, are at best a representation of reality, which is constantly changing. So if we take the model's result as reality, then we can see things already drifting from the beginning.
Wow, I think that's a lot for them to go. And actually, if, for the audience, if you're listening, have a think about that, and please get in touch and share your thoughts, and I'll share that with Alice as well. She'll see it. Maybe we'll get Alice back on for a Q&A, and we get people and we can explore, give you the opportunity to ask Alice the questions. So, but thank you so much for coming on. I've really enjoyed this episode.
Me too.
And for the audience, if you've enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe, and share to people that may have also get great value from Alice's work. So once again, Alice, thank you so much for
Thank you,
coming
Mark.
on and being a guest.
They're happy to be here today. Thank you,
Cool.
everybody.
Bye, everyone.